So, there are many ways to go viral on the internet these days. Some good, some not so good. I'm not sure if I'm the first guy to bare his legs and wear a kind of skirt on a talk like this. I don't know, and it's yet to be seen whether it's a good idea or not. But I wonder what you're thinking seeing me like this. Is this an embarrassing attempt for attention? Am I mad? Probably. A little bit. Are you offended? Or are you amused? Or perhaps you might be thinking that there's some other purpose to this. Maybe you're thinking that this belongs to some kind of culture that isn't ours. And if you do think that, well done if you do, does that actually change what you think of looking at me? Does it make my dress any less embarrassing? See, this is called a lungi. It's worn in various parts of Asia, but in particular, it's the traditional dress of working men in Bangladesh. It's also the onesie of choice for all men in Bangladesh for lounging around at home. It doesn't matter whether you're working in the fields or in the streets or at home. It doesn't matter whether you're a labourer or whether you're the highest politician. All tend to wear lungis. Now, I swore I would never wear one while my family and I were living and working in Bangladesh. It is, however, extremely useful. Bangladesh for most of the year is very hot, very humid, and very sweaty. And lungis enable you to, shall we say, breathe in areas you really want to breathe, unless you're happy to grow things like fungal infections. And embarrassingly, like many other people, I'll confess, that happened to me, and I suffered as I continued to resist wearing one of these. But eventually, about 5 years ago, I relented, and I actually started wearing one. And I can tell you, I'm very glad I did. Now, most men don't wear anything under a lungi, and it's not held up by a belt. It's just the material knotted like this. So you can imagine it's quite amusing to watch a guy walking down the street and he's suddenly grasping at his waist as he realises it's beginning to come undone. I would imagine it would be pretty embarrassing if it's, say, in a room full of important people like yourselves, it was to drop to the ground. Luckily for you, I am British and not Bangladeshi. And there's one thing that the British must always be, and that is dignified. Now, I don't know if you feel any more comfortable with what I'm wearing now, but I know I do. Isn't it funny how we can get freaked out by the arrangement of a simple piece of cloth, whether it be around our waist, or maybe over the head, or even across the face? I know that even if I understood the point of the lungi while I was living in Bangladesh, it completely twisted my mind seeing all these men going around in what I thought were skirts. And I was there basically on and off for about 10 years. The worst thing for me was watching Bideshis, that's foreign people like me, wearing these lungis out and about in the streets. It just kind of felt so wrong, so kind of like other. It was like, wear your own clothes, don't try and wear theirs, please. And even now, it kind of still niggles in the back of my mind. But this talk actually isn't about our choice of clothing. It's actually about how we perceive other cultures and perhaps maybe how we struggle with them. There was a lot about Bangladesh that I struggled with. It was a culture that was so completely different to what I was used to. I grew up basically in a very safe, northern, white, middle-class, educated kind of culture. I didn't know any Asians at all before I went out to Bangladesh. I didn't know any Bangladeshis apart from the one or two that I would meet when I would pick up my Indian takeaway. Because of that isolation for me from that kind of culture and the incessant media concentration on certain groups and terrorism and things like that, I found myself very suspicious and very fearful about going out to a country that was 90% Muslim. Now, Bangladesh has a land area about the same as England and Wales. It's a very small country. But whereas we have about 56 million people occupying that area, and we feel a bit overcrowded, Bangladesh is home to around 170 million people. It is arguably the most densely populated country in the world. And I was scared of each and every single one of them. Quite honestly, I bought into the media message that said there was a definite us and a very definite them. And psychologists will tell you this is called attributional bias, that we kind of form ourselves into an in-group that we see as being good and all being positive, and them, they, are in the out-group, and that's not so good. And in times of difficulty and problems, that can be the group that we blame. That will be the group that is our focus for who's got it wrong. They become the scapegoats for us. And this is normal. This happens in all cultures, all communities. But it usually happens without us thinking about it. So how I came to end up teaching in a small rural school in a particularly impoverished part of Bangladesh is a long story. But it's ironic that given my monocultural white background, that I ended up teaching for over 5 years in a country I couldn't even find on the map before myself, my wife and our 2 children went out there to live and work. This is our first day of school. My 2 kids behind me, coming along. But the years I spent living in Bangladesh were liberating and rejuvenating. And I found 2 things I came away with in particular. One was that everything that I thought was true about other cultures was challenged and shaken to its core. And the second thing was that everything I thought I knew about being British was also challenged. You see, when you spend time with people who are completely different to yourself, it's like holding a mirror up to yourself. And I saw myself, my own community, my own society, my own culture, possibly clearly for the first time. I find myself questioning everything about what it meant to be British. Things like our love of independence, our stiff upper lip, our not making a fuss, our need for personal space, which, believe me, in Asia is a very different concept. And most of all, our favourite pastime, queuing. But I was challenged in other ways too. This woman, her name is Sharola, and she's a Santal woman. She belongs to one of several dozen so-called tribal groups or indigenous people living in Bangladesh. Now, she challenged me as an educationalist, because Sharola had a very basic education. She can read and write Bangla, had pretty much no English at all, she never used it, and to all intents and purposes had no qualifications. She worked for us as our main maid, cook and nanny, something called an ayah, for the entire time that we were living in Bangladesh. Being an ayah is one of the lowest positions that anyone can take up in the country. And I was paying her something like less than £10 a week, which was the maximum that I was allowed to, really, but even by Bangladesh standards, that was pretty pitiful. I should, by rights, have felt very sorry for her, because I come from a state school background, one that believes that results is everything. Pushing our children to higher qualifications, pushing them on for that is everything, that's all that matters. But here was Sharola living and working in pretty rotten conditions, living in a mud hut, which she still does today. Here she is with my wife, and behind you can see the buildings there. Take away the bamboo and the tin roof, and the rest of it is mud. When the rains come down, and they come down heavy, that starts to wash away, and you have to start rebuilding your own home. And that happens a lot. Sharola quickly became an inspiration to me. Here was an indigenous woman living in a fiercely patriarchal society, and believe me, she was no pushover. Instead, she was and is very intelligent, witty, very capable, well known and well respected in her area for coping with things under pressure, and also deeply calm and content and peaceful and joyful with her own life. She rapidly went from being an employee to us to being family. And she still is, to this day, a family member. even though we've come back from Bangladesh a few years ago now. This is her with some of her family and myself after we went for a trip a few months ago. Now, I believe that if Cheryl had grown up in the UK, she would have earned great qualifications. She would have probably gone on to a really good career. I'm guessing a managerial career she would have managed very, very easily. But would she have been any happier? I don't think so. Genuinely, I've never met anyone more content and happy with life than this woman. I envy that inner peace that she has and always have. But she's not alone. There are millions like her from all different kinds of classes and religions in Bangladesh. I came back thinking, why am I forcing kids to learn stuff they don't want to learn? Am I really providing for them a better and happier future? Or am I just churning them out because society demands that that's what I should do as a teacher? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-education, of course not. But I did come back to the UK with a newfound respect for people like farmers and cleaners and other jobs that we tend to think of as being quite lower and not as important as roles such as doctors and teachers and so on. And why do we think of them as lower? Because they don't have this piece of paper which seems to say, you are worthy. Now, I could give you hundreds of examples from all different kind of classes and cultures within Bangladesh, but I don't have time. But what I will tell you is that I'm not blind about the problems that are in Bangladesh, and they are many. And it's unfortunate that over the recent months and years, Bangladesh has got into the international headlines for all the wrong reasons. What the international community thinks of the country is not what I know and love about Bangladesh. Bangladesh's national poet, Rabindranath Tagore, was the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, which he did in 1913. He wrote a song which went on to become the national anthem of Bangladesh. And the first line goes, Amar Shona Bangla, Ami Tomai Bhalobashi, my golden Bangla, how I love you. Now, you have to go to Bangladesh yourself to see just how golden it is. It's a beautiful country. Do you know that we have the world's longest beach at Cox's Bazar there? And that we have the largest mangrove forest, the Sundarbans. And these photos just do not do justice to how beautiful the Sundarbans are. But with all the problems and the difficulties that are in the country, and as I say, there are many, it's sometimes difficult to see that gold. But here's the trick. The real gold is inside the people. You cannot find a more kindly and generous people than those of Bangladesh. These are people who constantly have to work together to face the odds and to cope with the difficulties from even nature itself, which is so cruel in Bangladesh, with droughts one moment wiping out crops, which 70% of the country kind of live and work with their fields, and floods the next minute wiping out whole villages in some cases. It's a difficult life. Now, I believe that around the world, many people today remain focused on their own communities and their own cultures, so much so that they buy into that attributional bias that I was talking about. They believe what the media tells. If you believe that some particular people, some religion, some culture is bad, then eventually that starts to dehumanize those people and you start to believe the stereotypes. If instead you engage with others, you cut through the mire of what the media tries to tell you is true, and you start to find out for yourself. Now, thanks to the wonders of the internet and the fact that we can now travel around the world, anywhere in the world, within hours, I really believe that our national boundaries are ceasing to have relevance. I can go into the supermarket today and buy food that's probably come from just about anywhere in the world, or it could have come from my local farmer. I could go on the internet and buy something and it was shipped from America or China or Bangladesh, or it could come from the town next door. And without getting into all the political and economic arguments, who really cares? What does it matter any longer? Ladies and gentlemen, I put to you that we need to tear down our concepts of nationalism and tear down these nationalistic tendencies that we have and instead embrace the global village of which we are all members by the simple qualification of being human beings, of being alive. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that we should demean or dismiss our own cultures. Far from it. But by embracing others, we find that they enrich us, and we in turn enrich them too. And instead of letting people tell us what to think, we find that it empowers us to think for ourselves. Don't let attributional bias guide how you do your thinking. If you think there's a certain kind of people that are bad or are going to take over, whatever that means, or if you're embarrassed by a guy wearing a lungi, then there's a good chance that you would benefit from getting involved with people who are not from your background. Now, even if you consider yourself sympathetic to others, if you want to help people in the world, still even there, be careful. There's a story of a British bishop meeting with an African bishop, presumably from some particularly impoverished part of the area. And the British bishop said, "My brother, what can we do to help you?" And the African bishop said, "Well, what can we do to help you?" Well, it startled the British bishop. It's like, I'm from a rich country. We've got everything we need. There's nothing you can do to help us. But then, said the African bishop, there's nothing you can do to help us. Let us learn from other cultures. Let us learn from other people and see the good in them. Because in doing so, it holds up a mirror to our own people, and we see more clearly who we are. And when you open yourself up to the possibility, it's the adventure of finding out that you are not who you thought you were, then you start to see other people in a better light. And as you start to do that, you see yourself in a different light and a better light, and them in a different light again, and so on and so forth, in a positive feedback loop. It's a good thing. Why should we do this? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that if we don't, the world belongs to the haters, to the bigots, to the warmongers, to the people who would feed our prejudices. I believe we're poised on something of a precipice, not unlike before the Great World Wars, where the dominant voices of the media are telling us that we have definite enemies and that we need to take sides, we need to take up arms, and we need to do battle. Such people would want to divide us, because division is good for business. Because when people are divided, they're busy, and busy people always need things. And besides which, it's easier to tear something down than to build it up, and it's certainly much more exciting to read about it in the news. But while one man can tear a building down, many hands working together, quietly, not making a fuss, but working together properly, can build palaces of gold which last forever. And this is going on all the time, all over the world, day after day. Millions of us working to build a better global village for all of us, interdepending on each other, encouraging us on and helping each other, because heaven knows life is hard enough, isn't it? Why is this important? Because in a globally minded world, there can be no division, because there is no them and us. There's only us, all of us. Now, the temperatures in this country rarely warrant it, but I still wear my lungi at home to remind myself of all of this, and to remind myself that I am not the same guy who 10 years ago was fearful of other cultures. And besides which, wearing a lungi, it really freaks the neighbours out a treat. Thank you for listening.